Welcome back to the weekend. Donald Trump has just hours to pull together the $454 million appeal bond in his civil fraud case. Now, if he New York Attorney General Tish James says she is ready and willing to seize his assets. Here's how Politico puts the stakes for Donald Trump. Frozen bank accounts, a sheriff at the door, and maybe even a private plane put up for auction. Donald Trump could soon face any of those scenarios. According to Bloomberg, James is eyeing Trump's properties in Westchester County, which include a golf course and the Seven Springs estate. Joining us now to discuss it all is former FBI General Counsel and senior member of the Mueller probe, Andrew Weissmann. He is the co-author of The Trump Indictments and author of Where Law Ends Inside the Mueller Investigation. Also with us is MSNBC political analyst and, I would argue, Trump whisperer, Tim O'Brien. He's the senior executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion. Greetings to you both.
So gentlemen, good to have you both. Andrew, I tell you, man, the Trump indictment is bedside reading. Let me tell you, it is really important stuff to kind of lay out sort of the truth and the storylines that are involved here. But I want to focus on an interesting aspect that developed this past week is the reality of all of this has come home to roost with Trump. The bottom line, he broke. Okay, so he broke. Let's just go with that up top. But effective last Thursday, you had Judge Engoron put in a monitor to oversee Trump's organization's finances. Barbara Jones, a retired federal judge, has been overseeing the Trump Organization's finances since 2022 as part of a preliminary injunction. She's now installed for the next 3 years to oversee this. You have the Washington Post headline talking about bankruptcy is one way out for Donald Trump's financial jam. But the reality that we see there is Trump don't want to do that because he doesn't want to give the impression to his supporters that he is not the big billionaire that he claims to be. So you have this cross current of Trump trying to fake the image because he's all about the fake billionaire stuff. But the reality that he broke and the finances that are being overseen are not necessarily in place. His options are outside sources, foreign governments. What are his options here?
Well, before we get into the weeds, it's really worth remembering this is not normal. I mean, we get so inured to the details that sometimes we forget to step back, and we have the major candidate for the Republican Party tomorrow has got to pony up basically $500 million, or they're going to start taking his assets, or he's going to, just the neighboring court is going to have a judge decide the trial date for his first criminal trial. That's sort of the big picture of two things that are sort of happening tomorrow. And just getting into the weeds now of the judgment, it's worth also remembering where we are now. In the last week, what we have seen is his lawyers telling an appellate court, please give him relief because he is broke. He cannot pay this money, essentially. I'm sort of skipping over some niceties, but basically he's like, we need help because we can't post it. And you have Donald Trump saying simultaneously, oh, no worries, I've got the money. So again, just in terms of, you have the leading Republican candidate who is sitting there saying something that his lawyers are saying is not the case and have represented that to a court. So that is sort of a remarkable situation. I think that bankruptcy is the one thing he is definitely not going to do for a whole variety of reasons, not just because politically it might be bad, but if you go into bankruptcy, a trustee is appointed, and that means there is a complete open kimono about everything that he has done and seen and all of his finances. He loses complete control. There is a waiver of attorney-client privilege. I mean, that is sort of the biggest disaster, sort of both legally and politically. So I just can't see that as an option. So I think that we should expect some sort of deus ex machina from potentially some third party coming in, and I actually think he will really have to come up with some way of cobbling together, whether it's sort of stitching it together with little pieces, but paying everything, because otherwise I think it's a political disaster.
So Tim and Andrew, understanding that I think we all think he is going to find a way to come up with this money. We'll talk in a moment about how he does that, because the how of it, of course, matters. Let's just play out the hypothetical of what would happen if he were not to come up with that money, how it would then play out. You would have a search, then a seizure. This is how James would go after his bank accounts. Very limited means of appeals for him here once this gets rolling. What does it mean for the Trump org, Tim? And then by extension, the Trump political branch, were that to happen?
Well, I mean, I think in the initial phases, it'll freeze their ability to do business initially, because I think she's going to issue a sweeping attachment of all of his assets. There's been a lot of speculation that she might pick off certain properties here and there. But the reality, and I think her office, because they've been prosecuting him on this issue, has a fairly good sense of what kind of debts he has against each property, which properties offer the most liquidity to settle their judgment. But I don't think most of what he has in New York will get there. Remember, a German family owns the land under 40 Wall Street. His name is on Trump International at Columbus Circle, but GE actually owns the building. He is gorged historically on debt, so the amount of actual equity that can be liquidated to settle this judgment might be really incremental on each property. So she's probably going to go after everything he's got.
She's not limited to New York.
She's not limited to New York. She needs to get, sort of permission from other jurisdictions in other states. But I think that's a fairly routine process as well. So she's going to, this also won't be as dramatic, perhaps, as some people think. There's not going to be a large chain. We've talked about this. Put around Trump Tower when Trump says, bring this on. We'll show Donald Trump being prosecuted again. Most of it's going to be paper shuffling and digital. Nonetheless, for somebody who prizes his independence and prizes the idea that no one gets in his way, this is the financial equivalent of a proctology examination. And secondly, it just really ties him up and embarrasses him publicly, regardless of how he funds his escape. It is an existential moment for someone who has tripped through time and again financial embarrassments.
They also could, by the way, they could take all of the income streams that he has coming in. So if he's owed rent, royalties, all interest, all of that can be attached so that the incoming money to him can all be diverted so that Tish James says, wait a second, we get that.
And then, that's a great example. For example, 40 Wall Street, the value of that to him is he gets rents off that. Right. I don't know if I can, whatever. I think he gets around $20 million a year in income from 40 Wall Street. They will just grab that. They'll grab that as quickly as they can. But that doesn't go anywhere close to settling a $454 million judgment. So they're going to be putting their hands in every single pocket he has.
You all literally preemptively answered the question I was about to ask, because when we talk about, Tim, I think it's really important that you noted that this isn't going to be like when the FBI executed their warrant at Mar-a-Lago to go and see the documents, and you had the FBI jackets outside. This is a seizure of assets is paper pushing oftentimes. This is not Law and Order, okay? They're not kicking down the door with the jackets on and coming to take over the office. And that the Attorney General, you talked about the money coming in, but Donald Trump also has properties in other countries. So Politico has reporting that she could seek to seize those assets as well. So does this all really kind of just cuts into what Donald Trump thinks will play to his advantage? He thinks the seizure of his assets will play to his advantage because he thinks this is reality television or an episode of Law and Order where they're kicking down the door in jackets.
Well, I mean, that's part of the process we've seen is his comeuppance around performance art in the public sphere. He routinely slagged Judge Engoron and the court during that process. And at the end of the day, his lawyer, I don't think, was competent enough to get him properly through that trial. And then he got a massive judgment against him that is now complicating his life. I think he thought that courtroom would merely be another platform to show himself as a victim. And I think now this idea that, again, that he's going to own the libs by letting his entire business portfolio get seized by the government, I just think that is definitely not where he is. What this is representative of is that he's failed to anticipate the consequences of his own actions because he's reckless and because he's been insulated from the consequences of his own actions for so long that he's never had to be an adult about them. And there's a certain reckoning occurring right now.
Hey, Andrew, can I go back to a point that we actually kind of slid over a little bit? And I think a lot of folks have been sliding over it the last few days, and that is you have his lawyers making the case that he broke. I just can't keep emphasizing that enough, that he doesn't have the money. But then Donald Trump saying, I have $500 million in cash. What signal does that send to the courts at this point? And what potential legal jeopardy is Donald Trump creating for himself, if not his lawyers, where you have these two different stories being told to the court?
Two things. So one, just imagine you're a judge hearing this appeal and you've gotten all these legal papers saying we need relief and they have all these affidavits and all these arguments about why they cannot pay the money, a practical impossibility. And then the client is publicly saying, oh, I got the money. So in terms of the merits of that, if you're a judge, it's, as a judge who I used to know said, I have two words for you: denied. It's just not going anywhere. But just to be clear, in any other case, if anyone at this table were doing that, we would be called into court to explain how that happened, and the judge would be very seriously considering contempt of court, either the lawyers are lying or the client is lying, but one way or the other, there has to be a sort of, accountability. So that is what would normally happen. But as we've seen, one of the reasons Donald Trump has gotten away with this is he has not treated like anyone else. He has given advantages. In contrast to what he says, it's not that he has given disadvantages. He has given enormous leeway that wouldn't pertain to anyone else.
Yeah, and that's the obnoxious part of all of it.